Welcome, everybody. This is the summer edition of the Giggle.
Giggle!
And we are on video, which Jeremy,
We're on video.
we don't do that, but today is a special day. So tell us all about who our special guest is. I'm real excited to talk.
Our special guest is Stewart Pearce, who is one of the most renowned, respected voice and presence coaches in the world. I would say you've trained and worked with amazing people, Margaret Thatcher, top actors, and Princess Diana. And Stewart just wrote a book, Diana, the Voice of Change, which is just an incredible story about how you worked with her and helped her find not just her voice, but her confidence and her soul and her ability to spread her message through more than just words. And it is a great story, not in just your work with her, but applying that to other people. So someone can read it and really find the strength and the tools within them to share their vision and their story. So it's a fantastic read. You can get it on Amazon. Stewart Pearce, The Voice of Change. So welcome.
Well, bless you. Thank you for inviting me. And again, Jeremy's been doing a lot of work for me, so I celebrate you and all the wonders that you've created for me. Thank you so much.
Well, it's easy. It's an easy sell because not only is the book brilliant, but it's kind of the summer of Diana and the royals. And so we had her what would have been her 60th birthday, and the statue, which meh. Harry and Meghan and the baby, and just every day there's news. And so you are incredibly relevant to that conversation. And one of the things I love about you is you waited 24 years to tell this story, and you respected Diana's wishes that you not talk about it until after her sons are married. So talk about that. Like, how did that happen?
Well, as always with Diana, there was an extraordinary feeling of destiny, that she was an anointed one. And so even in her ordinariness, there were these wonderful inner percolations of intuition or of psyche, I guess, that percolated from her. And we knew that the July that we were saying goodbye for her to go on holiday with Dodie, we knew that there was a frisson about that saying goodbye. And we didn't quite know, from a logical or cognitive point of view, what that was, but we could both feel this energy. And as I hugged her goodbye, because we became very, very close during those 2 years, mostly as a result of the fact that our relationship was completely confidential. So we felt that we had this special secret, bearing in mind that her life was just so unbelievably public, and that everything she did was being scrutinized by everybody, not just the paparazzi, but also the household out of which she sprang. I mean by that, the royal family. And the firm around it. So she said to me in passing, wouldn't it be, and I said, this has been such an extraordinary experience. I look forward to seeing you in the fall. And she said, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we made a book out of all the work that we've done? And I said, oh my gosh, that would be an extraordinary idea. Oh yeah, but we mustn't bring it out until the boys are married. Now, it was just purely intuitive. Neither of us really understood what that meant. Wow. Now we see it. She was a prophetess, you see.
And you honored that. You honored that, which I find so just amazing, because no one else really did. And everybody really sold the china. As soon as, when she passed away, there was just so many books and people selling stories, and no one knew that you guys were working together, and that it was one of the best kept secrets in modern royal history.
Well, I guess you see, there's a tribute to the wonder of Diana and how she's still alive with us today, because she personified love. She was an embodiment of love. And, you know, a lot of people make a cast vilification in attitude towards her, you know, that she was thick as two short planks, or that she was always emoting, that she was deeply manipulative. I never experienced that. I knew that she engineered situations, but don't we all? I never saw her manipulating anything. However, she was the embodiment of love. And so her intention was that if the fabric of her essence presented in the book could be useful for the women of the world, that's what the voice of change is really all about. Because obviously we can all feel that we're teetering on this brink, particularly through the significance of being just post-COVID, we all pray. So we feel ourselves teetering on this brink, recognizing that a new hierarchy of values needs to be developed, and the ones that are infinitely more true and less full of falsehood, infinitely more to do with the heart and to do with empathy and compassion and love. So I would suggest to you that the voice of change is really the voice of love.
Absolutely. And how did you meet Diana? How did that relationship come about?
How do we meet our clients, Jeremy? I mean, it's all word of mouth, really, isn't it?
Yes,
I have this
absolutely.
extraordinary lady who is an immense supporter of mine way back. Alas, she's now dead. Mara Burney, who was a very celebrated restaurateur, had a very famous restaurant. You know, the thing about Mara, she brought Italian cuisine in the 60s to London. So the stories go that whenever the Stones had finished a concert, I mean the Rolling Stones, they would call her at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, Mara, could you make us pasta? And she'd get out of bed and make the boys pasta, you know. That was the sort of person that Mara was. So she knew everybody. I mean, absolutely everybody. She's the person who's renowned of putting her hand on Madonna's shoulder when Madonna was in the restaurant saying, honey, I think you're pregnant. And Madonna said, no, I'm not pregnant. No, there's no way I was pregnant. No, no, no. And then, of course, she said, Mara gave Madonna her card and said, call me in 2 weeks and tell me the news. And Madonna was pregnant. I mean, she was extraordinary, was Mara. Love, 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 love. So she said to me, there's somebody I want you to meet. And I said, oh, who's that? Because she was always introducing me to people. And, you know, sometimes the work would happen and sometimes it would just be a very joyous meeting. And then they move on to somebody else or whatever, you know, in their stupidity, of course. And I said, well, who is it? And she said, well, I just think you should come. And I said, well, but who is it? Tell me. She said, do you trust me? And I said, oh, yeah, absolutely, I trust you. So she said, okay, come to the restaurant at 1 o'clock on Thursday, in November of 1995, and let's have lunch. So, of course, I arrived in a certain amount of trepidation, thinking, who am I going to be introduced to? And I knew the head waiter, and I said to Pepe, where is Madame? Oh, she's downstairs in the salon privé, you know, in the private room. And I said, who's with her? And he said, you'll see when you get there. So I walked into this room and there was Mara and there was Diana. And Diana leapt up and grabbed hold of my arm and said, you will work with me, won't you? With these two sapphire blue eyes right here. And, you know, in that moment, I sort of like fell in love, like most people did, because she was just so special.
And that had come after the Martin Bashir interview, where she didn't like, she liked what she said, but she didn't like how she said it.
Yeah, she felt that the statement of liberation was a major relief for her, although she knew that it would actually create huge waves, which of course it did. But then, I mean, she was becoming used to and responsible for that she was an anointed one and she created waves wherever she went. So there was all of this. But when she saw the rushes, as it were, you know, she looked at herself and she realized that there was this very submissive little voice being used. And she didn't really feel that it was right at the very heart of this personality that she was beginning to allow to emerge. I use the word personality advisedly because the root of the word personality is persona, which in Latin means through sound. And so she was very aware of how she was revealing herself through the richness of what she was feeling inside. And on the outside of her, it was very small. And she wanted to find the same magnitude on the outside of her that she felt within, because by this time, she was feeling relieved, she was feeling liberated, she was beginning to get a sense of her own power, she was beginning to develop the projects that she wanted that were all charitable endeavors, that she was really, you know, she was really beginning to feel her hallmark. Whereas up to that point, she'd been in not denial of it, but in, in fear of it, I guess.
So
Well,
how do you,
I
oh,
mean,
sorry, Beth, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, I also feel like for women during that time period, where all of the things that she shared about her life was something that people just didn't talk about. And it took a long time. People are just starting to talk about those things now. And she was such a pioneer in that. But to your point about how she was portrayed in the Martin Bashir interview, where she was almost like the victim of it, and it was just more, like you said, her voice was smaller when she really wanted to convey something else. How did you bring that out of her, and where did, in terms of that transformation? Because I almost feel like it's like like it was visionary back then, because we just didn't talk about all of these things.
Well, it was beginning. It was beginning. Remember that she'd been through 10 years of self-discovery up to that point.
Mhm.
And so, because she'd had such crucial pressures to do with her bulimia, to do with the fact that she loved having children, but she also experienced postpartum depression. And also that was commingled with the fact that she was being criticized by the people that she was trying to inveigle her way into warm embrace with, meaning the royal family and the establishment. She was constantly being criticized. And also, she was just really beginning to discover what her voice was. Anyway, she took herself to so many different psychiatrists, psychologists, dietitians, or people that were beginning to specialize in eating disorders like anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. So she was quite well researched, do you see, and therefore felt herself to be positioned very much within the zeitgeist of the developing human empowerment movement that really arose at the end of the 70s and in the 80s when she began her royal career.
Mhm.
I woke up to these things in the latter part of the 70s. And of course, Shirley MacLaine had written her books. So we were all becoming aware of the fact that there is another aspect to the physical side of life, which is the metaphysical. And so we were tuning into soul or tuning into spirit. So she was very much part of that movement. What of course was so extraordinary was really what took place at her death. Although she was epoch making and an immense lodestone or figurehead for so many major charitable endeavors during her life, what was so extraordinary was what happened when she died, because as I record in the book, 3.5 billion people wept.
Mm.
And this was the mega global collective mourning that had ever taken place in recorded history. That I find fascinating, that so many people were evoked by Diana's presence and didn't quite rationalize what was taking place as the shockwaves moved into their bodies, and automatically they're related to their own mother's passing or their own sister's passing or their dear lovers passing, their wives passing, whatever, and feeling the unmourned grieving of what that process was all about, which became, as so many, archetypal figures do, that suddenly there's a huge projection of collective psyche onto that individual.
Mm.
So how
All
do
of
you, someone like
like,
Diana, like, and with any client, like, what's your process? Like, how do you get them to that place where they can talk with confidence and match what's inside them with their words?
well, firstly, we examine what they feel, what they perceive the disempowerments are. And the disempowerments are a whole arrangement of satellite issues that come from one particular center, which is I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
I
So,
feel lonely, I feel abandoned, and therefore
so
I feel unsafe, insecure, and frightened. So firstly, I ask the questions so that I can then see, one of the great things about human consciousness is that once you can identify what the problem is, you have power over it. Because nothing is
kind of like
singular.
a therapist in that sense of understanding who they are and getting it out of them.
Yeah, well, our voices are at the very core of our beings. So as I was just saying about persona, that personality actually is, we're talking about somebody's voice,
Right.
but really what we're doing is very generally speaking about the quality of somebody's being, the whole fabric of their resonance. But really, we're going to the very center of, do they touch me or do they not touch me? Do I feel that they're true or do I feel that they're false? Can I trust them? Can I not trust them? And of course, we all have this inbuilt, as it were, barometer within us, a soul barometer, because we know when we're babies, we know who we can be with, who we feel safe with, and we know who is unsafe to be with. So we all know this, you know, it's an inherent spiritual toolkit that we have, so to speak, this intuitive reckoning. And this was immensely advanced within her. However, so I asked the questions about, well, how useful can I be? What do you feel about your voice? And that's when we get into, well, I don't feel it's good enough. Why don't you feel it's good enough? Well, I don't feel good enough, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So there are several, you know, I've been trained in psychotherapeutic processes. So there are several very non-invasive, very gentle processes that we can utilize to literally alchemicalize, you know, to turn negative into positive. And then it's a physical process because we each have a note. And so I tune people into their notes. Most of us are completely unaware of this because we've been educated, socialized, and conditioned to just live here. So most of us just, you know, we're like this the whole time. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And I mean, you can hear that as soon as I start doing this, I become completely disorganized and full of anxiety. And in a moment, you're going to think, who on earth is this person? I come back to my note. So what I do is I introduce people to their note, and we start by looking at breath, because if we're frightened, we don't breathe. Meaning when we breathe in, we breathe the world into our beings. And when we breathe out, we breathe ourselves out into the world. Well, if the world is hostile, we don't breathe. And that's why we get small. You see? Very simple.
Well, you helped me because I've been doing this podcast and other ones, and I didn't like the sound of my voice. And you actually told me that my tongue was on the roof and it needed to be lower day and night. I actually listened to myself, and it literally, I was so happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm not going to embarrass you by saying let's do it now. But yeah, it's an interesting technique, isn't it? You know, that literally our tongues rest very, very high in the back of our mouths. So we cram the back of the tongue up against the soft palate, as it's called, which is right at the back of the roof of the mouth. And as a result of that, we sound really, I mean, there I am, you know what I'm saying? I mean, really, you know, I sounded like Woody Allen thing, you know? But if I drop the back of my tongue, suddenly the whole of the tone opens. So I make it sound very easy because obviously I've been doing it for years and years and years and years. So we professional voice users, whether we're speakers or singers, the most important thing is that there's no tension here at all, that actually all the effort goes into the breath. So we stay completely centered. And then of course, the channel of our voices are completely open. And so wherever we are, we express the entirety of our presence rather than just, you know, really closing off.
I love it. Well, it's so funny because when we were talking earlier about when I said I was from Brooklyn, but it's one of those things that I went to school in Massachusetts. We were Brooklyn girls who always worked hard at not sounding like we were from Brooklyn. All of my friends moved. We all left the borough. But when we're having fun, we go right back into the Brooklyn accent. But that was something, to your point, you know, I had voice training and was always very mindful of when I'm in a conversation with someone, how do you want to, you know, what do you want to convey? And you don't want to take them back to Canarsie.
Yes, and I think the important thing is to recognize that what we're describing is not wrong.
Right.
It's just that we're looking at a way of being able to discover a tonal linguistic that is actually open for all people, and that is more of an expression of who we are rather than the district that we're brought up in.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's interesting, because today we know that all the dialects that we once heard, say 25, 30 or further ago, you know, 25, 30 years ago, that they're beginning to be ironed out because our peoples are so rich in geographical mobility, and particularly you United States citizens, because you get so used to uprooting yourself 18, 19 to go right across the country or maybe even abroad to a university. And then when you come back, it's rare that you go back into the home nest. You establish yourselves in those major metropolitan communities. And so we change, you see. So I don't want anything that I say to be seen as a judgment, or that that way of sounding is wrong. It's just, is it effective for you? And this is what we were looking at in relation to what Diana was feeling, because she didn't feel that the magnitude of the joy and the wonder and the clarity of what she was experiencing inside, once the storm of bulimia, once the storm of, oh God, this man whom I love doesn't love me. Once that storm had been abated, she began to feel this sense of personal power, which we all do.
Now, can you
And she
listen?
wanted,
Sorry, keep going.
okay, I really finished.
Oh, can you listen to someone's voice and tell about them, like understand who they are just by the sound of their voice?
Yeah, this may be a useful reference, Jeremy, for the future, because I go onto TV programs and people will say, oh, here's the guy who reads the psychological blueprint of everybody by the sound of their voice. What can you tell me about such and such? And so often they play tapes of people that I don't know. I was in Ireland just before COVID and went on to RTE, which is the local TV station, a radio station. And so they played a number of major Irish politicians. This is in the south of the island, not the northern part, because obviously the northern part is under British rule. You know, and it's all a little bit like that, you know, in Southern Ireland. They're wonderful. I mean, I have Irish blood, so I love being
Right.
there. And I
Yep.
just love the Irish. And so there I was on this major TV show, and they were playing people, I didn't know who they were, but they were major politicians. One of them was the president of the country. And apparently my sketch or my profile was absolutely precise to the person. I didn't name them because I didn't know their names, but I told the interviewer exactly what their position was, and that they were, I didn't know they were politicians. I just knew that they were major figures in Irish history, you know. So yeah, that's what I do.
So what can you tell us about the royal family? Like, just, you know, Harry and Meghan, what are their voices tell you about them?
Well, I mean, sort of Meghan is an import, isn't she? So it's sort of, she's unusual in the sense that she wasn't brought up in the enclave of the royal family. And of course, Meghan is an immensely smart, intelligent young woman who, as we saw through her career as an actress, was very ambitious, quite rightly so. She could get great talents. And I believe that all of her work at Northwestern, where she was trained, and one of my greatest friends, who's one of America's leading female theater directors, trained her, you know, whatever it was, 20 odd years ago. And so I know that the voice training, in fact, I believe that that's where I met Meghan. I did a masterclass or series of masterclasses at Northwestern in the mid to late 90s. And I believe that Meghan was in one of those classes. I seem to remember her. I've met her subsequently. So Meghan is slightly different, but for the two boys, they're really the product of their education and the education that their mother destined for them or defined for them. Whereas then we go into the very center of the royal family and they have an unusual way of speaking, which is very much to do with the enclave and very much to do with the way that people in Britain sounded at the beginning of the 20th century. So we say things like off, meaning off. And are you playing golf? Meaning golf. The sort of sound that you hear in The Crown, you know, because one of my ex-students, who's a really good dialect coach, I said, why don't you go and do this? And he went in and, you know, became the dialect coach for all of the, I think he's still doing it, you know, if it's still being filmed, but certainly for the first two series with Claire and Matt playing Elizabeth and Philip.
What did you think of The Crown?
As a docudrama, I thought it was really extraordinary. I mean, I congratulate them all because I was actually brought up in all of that. My father worked for the royal family. And so, you know, I was happy too. I mean, the first 7 years of my life, we lived in St. James's Palace. You know, my father was a high-ranking official with Prince Philip, and they were the same age and, you know, 2 weeks apart. So they were together for 33 years before my father's early death in the mid-70s. I thought it was an extraordinary vibrational mirroring of what took place in the 50s, which is an energy vibration which is no longer with us. I mean, the tribe of innocence was still around. I don't think we can say that innocence is prevalent in our world today. Something else is living in our world today, which, of course, we know is on one level, sociologically speaking, really interesting, but on another level, it's really difficult to weather the storm.
Absolutely. And you, one of my favorite stories is back to Diana. You guys went to the movies together. Tell us about that.
Well, because Diana, as we know, although she was extraordinary and could be luminous and charismatic, that she felt herself to be really ordinary. And she was although she was a Cancer and very, very deeply moved by emotional processes like most Cancers, she was also very earthed. And so she was always wanting to do ordinary things like ordinary people. And so we always spoke by a cell phone. She would call me and say, "What are you doing this evening?" And I would say, "Well, I'm actually busy." Or, "No, I'm free. Why?" "Well, why don't we go to the movies?" So I would meet her just outside Kensington Palace in a blonde wig and a sort of black trench coat or whatever, you know, and a pair of sunglasses, and we'd run down the main road to the cinema, and I'd buy the tickets and we go in, and nobody once knew who she was. I think we did that 3 times.
Wow.
I mean, I do remember seeing that Tom Cruise movie where he plays oh gosh, what was it called? With
Mission Impossible?
Cuba Goodman is in it.
Oh, Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire, I do remember that very well because we laughed all the way through it.
That's great.
She was great. Diana was great fun. So yes, she was always wanting to be ordinary.
One of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you, the book is amazing, and you are just one of my favorite people. But Beth wrote her book too, Purpose, and it really is her story about finding her voice. And you know, there's great lessons in there about settling. Like, you know, I settled, my kids shouldn't settle, but Beth really didn't settle. I think the universe brought you down a different road. So Beth, talk about that for a second and how your story relates to what Stewart writes about.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I feel like I found my voice. I started to find it when I was a young mom, and I was working with Jeremy actually at CBS and was becoming confident in my role, but was also fascinated by women who were balancing work and family and still pursuing their dreams. So I became this go-getter of, you know, I refuse to fall into the, oh, now I'm going to have to be a stay-at-home mom. I want to have it all. And then I realized that you can't, but at the same time, you shouldn't be embarrassed by the fact that you have a family. And I kind of leaned into that aspect of it and became the first person who was telecommuting before many people even knew what that was. And then as I left the network, I had to really become more comfortable in building back my brand again, because I thought I was defined by by being at CBS. And when I went out on my own, it was a scary time for me, because I didn't have those same contacts again. And now I have children my daughter just graduated college. She's going into fashion design. My son is going into film. So I'm raising 2 creatives. And as they go for the job interviews, and my daughter will say to me, "Oh, well, this person just offered me a role in e-commerce." And I say to her, "No, this is your lane. Do not deviate from your lane, because I can talk to you about me, 25 years ago, where I just said, oh, I'm going to settle for this job because it sort of gets me close to what I want to do, but it's not exactly what I want." And so I'm proud of her because she actually is going down that path, and the opportunities are coming to her, and she's super talented. And it's almost like what I know now, I'm imparting upon my children, and really saying to them, if this is what you want to do, this is how you can get there. I'm not going to kick all the doors open for you, but I'm going to at least help you not necessarily make the same choices that take you off path. So that was kind of where, that settler syndrome comes into play. But I think it's really important as parents that we share with our children, these dreams are possible. there's a lot of work that goes into it, but you can make it happen if you really stay the course and you put in the time and you put in those hours and you get that training. So that's sort of
Yes, and I mean, it doesn't have to be irksome. It can be fun. Hard work can be fun.
right.
That I think we're beginning to really, again, you're describing for me what I believe the zeitgeist is at this time, that this is an expression of the voice of change. This is an expression of you finding your voice and how you want your own babes to be empowered as they grow into adults and find their voice. And that if we actually remain purposed in one trajectory, we can explore all the other satellite issues. I mean, I can remember for myself that 30 years ago, more possibly, when I woke up to the fact that I could do it all rather than just one thing, because I was brought up in the system of master, jack of all trades, master of none. You mean, oh, so you extrapolate in so many, I mean, creatives extrapolate. We have so many different things that we do. And we were told that it was wrong.
Mm.
And what I've learned is that it's not wrong, but what we need to do is to be very disciplined about the way that we focus into the trajectory. And that's partly, I think, what you're saying. So
Mhm.
more and more people, particularly ladies, I'm experiencing, because I seem to draw ladies to me who, clients, I mean, who wish empowerment processes. I'm seeing so many of you develop entrepreneurial skills. So you're becoming self-employed. And thereby what you're sharing with us, I feel is a token of what that experience is all about. It requires discipline. It requires steadfastness. It requires courage, but it can be extraordinarily exciting and funny and full of adventure, and wonderful things happen. We're fulfilling our own destiny
Mhm.
Do you find
rather than our destiny being controlled by somebody else.
do you find when you're dealing with women clients that if they've had children that they've lost themselves because they want to raise children? Is that like, do you find that is common?
Well, actually, no, because I feel that what mothers experience is that they find themselves through their children.
Amazing.
I mean, we are mere men. We wouldn't know. But I mean, the physiological, Beth will tell us much better, the physiological process of bringing forth, and she has two babes, who are now growing. But I mean, that's a huge physiological process. And, as we know that when parents have their children, they find their voices. I
Yeah.
mean, for example, go back to the royal family. I feel one of the things that I was always, not as a bone of contention, but always aware of with William and Harry, is that they were trying to devalue the very privileged education that they had at a major private school here called Eton, which has been around for the last 900 years. I mean, give me a break. And as a result, and has trained all the aristocracy, so we get all of this being sounded, and so their voices are sounding like that. And what the two boys were doing is sort of going a bit against that, sort of like that. And saying things like book and you and things, in other words, not fulfilling vow. Vows are very important to us in terms of resonating the tonality of our power.
Mm.
And then when William had his first child, when George came through, I noticed that his voice completely dropped in. I mean, I feel that there's a rite of passage that all parents go through, because suddenly you're not just responsible for yourself or your spouse, you're also responsible for this little baby who you're going to be responsible for the next 18, 19. I mean, Beth will tell us much more than I don't have my own children, so I've always looked after other people's children.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I feel that when they're babies, you as a parent or as the mother, you want to still justify I exist. I'm still here. I'm still relevant. I can still do that. If I'm a career person, I can still do this and still raise my children. And I'm very blessed that I had support over the years to have someone who was wonderful with them while I was able to work as well. But then when you start realizing what they're capable of and it just lights you up. And that's kind of what my kids do for me. My son is, he'll, to your point about voices, he does, he's in an improv group in Chicago now, and so he's doing all the different voices and has always had the deepest voice, and I don't know where it came from, but he's sort of like wise beyond his years, and I love the fact that he has this gravitas to his voice, and he's only 19. But he's always been that way, which has been so strange, but I'm so proud of him because he always seems kind of shy, but when he's performing, it's a whole different, he's a different person.
Yeah. Well, evidently a very, very rich interior life, sensitive to the core,
Yes.
feeling enormous things, which is maybe why the shyness appears, because sometimes the volubility of the feelings inside cannot be fully met on the outside. And so we become withdrawn or slightly contracted or shy. But at the same time, the great boon, as you just said, is that he has this richness, the richness that you speak of in his soul, because our voices, when we tune into the note of our voice, is the song of our soul. So that's really what you're describing. You feel that he's soul rich, and therefore his voice becomes soul rich. If we live just purely in a cerebral domain, we produce that sort of sound, I mean, really, the other day I had one of the world's leading quantum physicists in a session. And one of the reasons why he was coming, obviously he'll remain nameless, is that nobody was going to the lectures, but he's one of the world's leading quantum physicists. I'll stop doing that. When he came to speak, it was obvious that what was happening is that he was just working on this plane, and all of the passion, all of the desire that he had as a younger person when he discovered quantum physics was not being illustrated, was not being elicited, was not brewing in all of the wonderment of what he was sharing. So I switched him into his passion. It was extraordinary. I mean, I won't go into it now, but the story was really illuminating. In terms of how, by hearing the story, we can see it's an illustration for finding our own wonderment and our own joy and our own love and our own power and our creative destiny. Because in conjunction with the nature of people coming to me for their to find their voices, so to speak, I hear one thing being asked when I begin to just inquire, how is life? And the first thing they say is, I don't know what my purpose is.
That's the name of that book.
You see?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's
and
true.
I say, oh, your purpose is really easy. Your purpose is to optimize your creativity full of love and joy. So what is it you want to dream into creation? Which is what Beth was just saying about the kids. They're dreaming themselves into creation. And that's the way that the universe works in my wonderment, because I know what life was like in the early part of my life when I was shot full of insecurity and challenge, and largely as a result of the fact that I was just different from a lot of the kids when I was young and couldn't read and couldn't do math, and decided to self-mute for 2 years. I have a brother who's a year older, and he was my code breaker. And then discovered the one singular light, which was people kept saying, there's something about your voice. There's something about your voice. Well, there was nothing about anything else within my being because they were all saying, you are nothing and you will always be nothing. And a small voice inside me said, I think I'm something, but I didn't know how to address that because they were obviously very mighty and powerful people. I was a child, very young. So I've discovered that by aligning oneself with one's innate ability, not only do these innate abilities become expressed and escalate or accelerate into the wonder of our beings, but what also happens is that the universe has a conversation with us and provides us with synchronicity or fortune or luck or whatever we might like to call it. I feel that that's what means being the master and mistress of our own destiny.
Where does astrology come into this? Because I heard that you mentioned the Cancer sign and the universe. What role does that play in our lives?
Well, I think we're beginning to wake to the significance of the fact that we're a planet in a universe, within a galaxy, within a cosmos. And then there is a very strong possibility that this universe is in brotherhood or sisterhood with multiverses elsewhere. I mean, this is what's being spoken of in quantum physics. And then we begin to realize that we're rejuvenating or revivifying an ancient skill which all of our forebears used, particularly when they were connected with an organic mode of being, for example, living very closely in relation to nature. Because if you talk to any farmer knows when to sow the seeds, and they're always in relation to the cycles of the cosmos. What's the moon doing? What's the sun doing? What are the cycles of the seasons? So astrology is an extraordinarily powerful influence in our lives, and always has been, you know. Today we joke and say, oh, my computer's just crashed. That's because it's Mercury retrograde. And we still keep working. But if we go back, let's go back to Elizabeth I, you know, so we're talking about the latter part of the she died in 1603. So the latter part of the 16th century, that when the court astrologer came and said, your Majesty, Mercury is going retrograde, the monarch would say, vacation.
Love it.
And what we do is we keep working. That shows how we're so not in touch with the natural cycles of our beings.
It's funny because in New York, we have the New York Post, which is a very entertaining paper. It's not news, but it's entertaining. And they have a horoscope columnist who I think she just makes things up. And some Aries in her life dumped her or did something very bad to her, because every time, like, I read Aries and it's like, just kill yourself. You're gonna have a horrible day.
Because, you know, the association with Aries is the great I am. You know, that they're very, it's a fire sign, and their journey, their destiny is to discover who they are. So often they can be very proud people and very bold about I am. But so also there's a shadow complex that goes with that, which is I'm not being who I am, so I'm going to kill myself.
And my daughter's an Aries. So there you go. And my son's a Taurus. See, so she's
oh, your son, I'm a Taurus.
Yes.
We Taurus people are really lovely.
I know. I'm telling you, it's a joy. I'm a Libra, so I'm an indecisive perfectionist. So that's me.
Stewart, what is the takeaway from Diana, Voice of Change? What do you hope people get out of
it? Love. Love is all there is. Right at the very crystalline presence of what the book is all about. It begins with love and it ends with love. Diana began with love and it ended with love.
Amazing.
Yes.
I feel that, you know, if we could bring love, empathy, compassion, understanding, inclusivity, mutual respect, and human dignity into our behaviors, we wouldn't actually see the shadow complex as grossly as we see it at the moment. And, you know, I feel that a huge reformation has happened. We are recording this in July 2021. I feel a reformation has happened for you guys in the United States since the beginning of this year, because you have a man in government, your senior incumbent, so to speak, who is an empath. So he's a kind man.
What would Diana be like today?
Oh, God, I've often dreamed of this. I think she would be amplified in the wonder, in the beauty, and in the outpouring of her love. It would just be greater. And therefore touching so many people. I mean, you know, this is why, you know, thanks to you, I've met this new publishing house, and there will be another book about her legacy. What will Diana be today? And I feel that we need to call it Diana, We Wish You Were Here.
We do.
Because, you know, because she was an iconic vessel of innocence, beauty, purity, undiluted love, but also not somebody who was straitjacketed by those forms. She was also wild, impetuous, outrageous, very funny.
Well,
but she wasn't a bitch. So many of her critics refer to as being manipulative and bitchy. I never, ever, ever saw that. I saw her be angry, but that's different. You know, that's when we use our own self-righteous to say, no, this will not be. And I know that she did this in relation to the man that she loved, because she loved Charles all the way through to the end.
Well, thank you so much for being on our on the Giggle. Your book is fascinating, Diana.
Read the book, read the book. You know, because if I may just drop in, when you ask that question, it's interesting because that's the first time I've been asked that question. And I feel that I wanted to write the book not as a niche book, but as a book that has general application. And I feel that from most of the readers that come to me and they say the most amazing things about what they feel about the book, that it's touched them in different ways. And I feel that's what the magic, the mystery, and the bounty of love is. It touches us in different ways.
Absolutely.
So thank you for having me on.
All right, and everybody order the book.
Yes.
It's the book of the year. And I'm not just saying.
I love it.
Thank you, Stewart.
Yes.
Bless
Thank
you.
you.
Bless you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Take care.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye-bye.